Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Houses of Worship webinar today. We are lucky enough to have Kristen Hassard, who's the VP of Nonprofit for USLI, and Michelle Belden, our nonprofit underwriter, and of course, Jacob Cole, our marketing coordinator. My name is Anae Agostini. I'm CEO of CID Insurance Programs, and let's go ahead and get started. Of course, we've always got webinar logistics. Everyone will be muted, but you'll be able to hear. And please let Jacob know if you can't hear for some reason. Questions are important to us, so please pose them in the chat box over to your right of the screen. And you can pose them at any time throughout the webinar, and Kristen will stop and answer those questions as we go. There will be a short survey at the end, and we would really appreciate your feedback. So now, what are the objectives of the webinar today? So we're going to be talking about houses of worship, and you're going to learn the opportunity and the current trends that are going on with nonprofit, especially houses of worship. There's important coverages for nonprofits that you want to pay attention to throughout the webinar. And then last but not least, understanding the application and how to obtain a timely quote. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you very much, Anae, and the whole CID crew. Very happy to be here. As Anae mentioned, I'm from USLI. I've been working on houses of worship for about 17 years now, and all nonprofits really. And it's a great area. I'm very excited to talk about it. So, some of the things we will get into today is really how CID and USLI together combine to be a very effective and efficient solution. At USLI, we've been building products for nonprofit organizations with the nonprofit in mind. So we're looking to put coverages together that they specifically need, as well at a price point that a nonprofit, a church, a community association could afford. And the goal is to really put as many lines of coverage together on one policy. But again, we are looking to fill the need that you need right now. And so we are flexible. We can bind a single line. We can bind multiple lines. You've got that kind of control over the process. But you're only working with one application, sometimes not even an application, and one underwriter. And what I'm happy to share is that we do have many quoting options, both phone and web quote for nonprofits. And we'll get more into that as the presentation goes, but you can see the phone number there. And you can see Michelle's contact information for any application that you might need to submit. So what is the opportunity? I mean, many of you who are attending probably already have a deliberate process to focus on houses of worship. And those that don't might be surprised at the significant number of houses of worship or churches that are in the United States. I think if you're thinking about, driving down the street, you see a Starbucks, you see a McDonald's. These things pop up everywhere you go. But how often do you recognize that you're seeing houses of worship? There's over 350,000, which is actually probably a greater number than that today. This statistic is from a few years ago. That outnumbers the specialty coffee shops, fast food, and pizzerias. And a lot of that's because not every house of worship or church is this large mega church that you can see for miles. There are many that are much smaller, that meet privately, that meet in other churches, that meet in public spaces. And there's a lot of opportunity. There's over 4,000 new places of worship that open every year. And then just to add on to that, when you think about a church, it is a touch point for the community, for many people in the community. This is a connection for you for new leads, new streams of revenue for all those organizations that might be affiliated, might be using church space. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So current trends, where is the church marketplace going? As the years go on, we are seeing many more churchgoers really desire a more casual, a more customized approach to worship. So they are seeking out experiences that are a little bit more like a social gathering to talk about their faith. It's not necessarily as traditional or as bound by rules and guidelines as maybe church was, 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 years ago. And as we see new churches that operate and pop up, and they may not even call themselves a church, we see them really opening more in that space as far as non-denominational or independent. And then looking at more current trends, it's no mystery, last year was a very difficult year. And while a number of churches did pause operations, they maybe had let coverage lapse, they maybe were canceled for non-pay. Since March, we have seen a significant number rebound, and we are seeing the newer in business organizations as well. And I think that's because they're answering a call, right? They're recognizing a need for community, and people all want that right now. So we are seeing an increase. And to that point, I'll just mention, we look at premium growth just for USLI in our church book, that's up about 30% year over year. So we're very excited to see the growth, and that's happening in many different parts of the country. Last trend that I'm sure you're aware of is that there are a lot of concerns about weather-related property losses, and maybe property losses overall. Looking at the past few years, from 2017 to 2021, we see this constant cycle of wildfires in many different states. It's not just California, it's Oregon, in Colorado. So there's concerns there. We're seeing the impacts of pretty significant hail and windstorms in the Southeast and in Texas. And even in 2020 with the civil unrest and riots and vandalism, and then all of that you add together really can impact how some carriers are approaching this. So we are seeing, I don't want to say a hardening of the market, but we are seeing some changes. We are seeing some rate increases, and it shouldn't be a surprise that a lot of churches are looking for you to help them find maybe another option, maybe another cheaper solution, but that's not sacrificing coverage. So this is how I think CID can really help you. They have access, of course, to multiple markets, USLI being one of them, and we've had this relationship for a long time, and as I mentioned earlier, we've been running houses of worship for over 30 years. So it's not something that we're jumping into and jumping out of because we don't understand. We know this market pretty well. And we can offer up to $3 million in total insurable value and 30,000 square feet in size. If you are working on risks that might be larger than that, I would still submit them to Michelle. There's a chance that she has other markets that can handle them. But under those two qualities, we should be able to help you with the package. And as I mentioned again, those multiple quoting options are available for those types of churches. So with houses of worship, we don't have restriction on the types of denomination. We love startups, we love storefronts. It could be a building or a tenant-based. All of these are really on the table for us to review. We really just look at their operations and what it is that they're doing. From an eligibility standpoint, we have a very broad eligibility, and you can see that in our numbers. We're quoting about 80% of the risks that we receive, and so that shows that the vast majority of the time we're able to work on them. So up to that 30,000 square foot mark would be really for what's the package that USLI can do. When you think of a single line of coverage, perhaps management liability, there really isn't a restriction from a size standpoint. We look at churches that have other operations other than just worship. They might be doing food service, they might have counseling, they might operate a shelter. Any of those are definitely not a problem. And we can always talk about those types of additional risks and make sure that that is being addressed by the policy. It's a very important feature that, with nonprofits and many churches, they're trying to answer any need they can in the community. So we want to make sure that we share what it is that we can do there. And other exposures that you might commonly see, things like Mother's Day out, sometimes you have lock-ins or little retreats. All of that are things that we can review. And there's underwriting around certain risks as well, but that's just something to be aware of, that we can have that conversation. Now, what happens to be outside typically of the USLI appetite from a package standpoint will be if the church owns or operates a child care center. If there is a tenant operating it, it's under another name, another legal entity, not a problem. But if the church itself has shared staff that is, providing that service for full daycare, and I'm not talking about, where the children are for the church service sitting in a separate room and doing Bible study, all that is totally fine. I'm talking about your 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week childcare center. That's what's kind of outside of the appetite. A K through 12 school, these primary schools, private schools, again, would be outside the package appetite, as well as these mega churches and churches with construction ministries. Now, if there's an incidental event, perhaps, that the church is offering where they might be doing some help clean up in the community, or light construction work, we can review that. But what I'm concerned about is really more what looks like Habitat for Humanity. That would be outside of what we're looking to do. So what coverages are available at a basic level? If you're looking at your most price conscious church and they really want just your basic coverage, of course we can comply and help with that. We have a very comprehensive general liability policy. It is not restricted to the designated premise, meaning, if they have operations at 123 Main Street and then they decide that they're going to have a prayer breakfast in the park, that's covered. It doesn't matter that it's at a different location. Higher non-owned auto is available, and of course we're offering coverage for those church members as additional insureds were they to operate under the direction of the church. And then from a property standpoint, we can offer contents only. We can do contents in building. Some of the temples are going to look for Torah coverage, or some of these unique artifacts. We can take a look at that to a limit. Theft and employee dishonesty are also coverages that we can help address, which usually are a concern from a church standpoint. So what differentiates us, what really sells our quote? Again, I would say where we started our product development really was to address those new startup storefront tenant-based churches. And we go beyond that, of course, but because of that, we have very, very low minimum premiums, and that's across the country. The product is offered on an admitted basis. In some areas, it starts at about $425. In other areas, the minimum premium, like in New York, it's going to be a little bit larger, more like at $650 to $750. But we're trying to get it, again, to a price point that a church can afford. As the size of the risk increases, of course, pricing is going to increase. We will automatically include coverage for pastoral professional. That's going to be built into the GL. And this is important for any church that does any sort of counseling with its members. If potentially the pastor is giving bad advice or is operating outside of his or her depth, this is where this coverage can come and play. These claims are not frequent, but they can be very extensive from a cost standpoint. They're emotional typically, and they might involve somebody who's a victim of abuse, or someone who might be suicidal, and they're not getting the correct care. And so that's an important thing to think about when you're working with churches. Abuse and molestation, I know everybody's always looking for this coverage. We are not changing our position on what we offer. We still start at a sublimit of $100, $300, which is included for no additional premium. And then we can extend up to $1 million limit, and that's available for a flat charge, very competitive flat charge. Additionally, our underwriting is very easy to comply with. Any church can look at what we're requiring and actually put those measures in place to become eligible. So we'd like to help organizations provide a safe service, provide what they need to, and to have the right practices in play. So it's not going to cost them anything additional. It's just policies and procedures that they should consider. The directors and officers is also a big seller. This is management liability. It's covering the board for the decisions they make. And you think about the sensitive nature of a church and how much people really hold on to what their church experience is like. So if that changes, that could create some issues with the congregation, with parent churches. And so that's why that management liability is key, as well as just simply how they're managing their money. Whether they're putting that towards really good use or not. And that's really in the eyes of the congregation. And then also third-party discrimination and harassment is available through our employment practices piece. I would say, a church can be a target for risk, for concerns like discrimination, harassment. Technically, they are legally allowed to discriminate, and those things might be on the basis of sexual affiliation and all of that. It's important that they have that protection. I think every church really wants to operate in a way that's fair and kind, but how they operate and how that operation is viewed by others is really where this discrimination harassment can come into play. Let's just say they're not offering to have wedding services, and it's because their policy is that you have to be a church member. Are they discriminating? That's really up for a court to decide whether or not there's actually a merit to that. So it's important that they have a defense, and that's what you get with that EPL piece. As I mentioned earlier, these houses of worship are really touch points to many people in our communities. And so you'll see Alcoholics Anonymous or similar group counseling is going to be meeting at churches. Youth sports might be using the facilities. Social groups like knitting groups might come and again use the congregation's hall to meet. And they may also have a soup kitchen offer their services out using the church kitchen as a way to provide that service. So when you think about these different groups, I think the prevailing myth is that they don't feel that they need insurance because the church already has insurance, but that's really not, as we all know, the way it works, because that's not the church's operation. So make sure that those churches you work with have use agreements and that do require insurance be in place for anyone who's using those facilities. And you as an agent can offer those solutions to those tenants, whether they're actually tenants or not. Very simply, you just need to know what is the name of the organization, kind of a description of what they're doing, how many members do they have, or what's the square footage that they're utilizing. Get those pieces down and call that number, and you can give them a quote, and thereby you're limiting the liability of the church, but you're also providing a very cost-effective solution. Many of these organizations are going to be minimum premium sized. Additionally, ask for referrals. Many churches support through volunteering different organizations, and they donate, and so there's a relationship there. And examples may be a halfway house or shelter, senior services, youth outreach. Again, these are other opportunities where you can provide a very broad coverage form at a very cost-effective way and simply in a very simple way. So if you're looking to build the book that you're writing, there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of ways to find churches of different denominations. Church Finder, also churchangel.com is another one. There can be networking groups to join. And like I mentioned earlier, asking affiliated organizations if you can have an opportunity to review because you've done such a good job previously is another great way to continue to build your network. Hosting special events, and also looking at the different board members and finding out whether or not they're serving on other nonprofit boards. A lot of times, these people are such great community members that they're trying to do as much as they can to serve, so they usually are on more than one nonprofit board. All of our policies will include our access to our business resource center. And I like to mention this because it is important for any startup, but also any existing organization that really wants to make sure that they're doing everything right. So it'll give them access to free and discounted services, all of them listed right here. I think some of the ones that I really like to point out are some of the resources for recognizing signs and symptoms of abuse to preventing child abuse. Also, this human resources helpline can really be helpful with a lot of the tricky situations they might come into with their own staff. So we're gonna change gears here just a little bit. I know we're talking a lot about this whole product. Now the question is, how do you get a quote? There's a lot of different ways to do that. The first, of course, that I always like to talk about is getting a quote over the phone. I love to mention that because when we see quote business over the phone and that premium from that channel is up about 44%, we are quoting it 92% of the time, probably because you're doing a better job of explaining it to an underwriter, and we're getting a better job of understanding it versus reading something off of an accord. And we're binding it about 10 points higher through the phone than we are through applications. And I think that's because we're able to share the advantages. And the web. The web is quoting online is a really great solution too. We've seen that increase about 88%. Here we're quoting 85% of the time and binding at about 30% of the time. So I'm going to do a quick demo of that, just knowing that maybe there are times where you are trying to just get something done and it's on your own schedule. Where would you go? So hopefully we can all see the website now. This is CIDinsurance.com. You would go to the product page and just click on, it's under broker tools, and to get a web quote through USLI. And so here we're going to click on churches and houses of worship. And it will prompt you to log in. I've already logged in. And you can see here we're on the product page. I like to point out this little orange box where it says need help, start chatting. This will get you access to an actual underwriter who can answer any questions you have in real time. Or you can call, they can pull up the quote that you're working on and take it over from there, just in case you run into any problems. But I'll try to help right now so that way you don't run into problems. So applicant name is just the name of the church, and you're gonna wanna select the state. And then the lines of coverage that you're interested in quoting. Just for simplicity's sake, we'll just quote the property and the general liability. Then the question is, do they have any claims? This is really meant for risks that don't have claims. So if you know it's claims free, you're good to go. If you don't know, just mark unknown. But if you know there are claims, that's a great example of where you do want to submit the risk. It's going to ask you how many years has the applicant been at the current location. If they've been in operation and at the location longer, it gets you a credit. So let's just say this one's been there for 10 years. And the next question is about whether or not USLI or Mount Vernon or US Underwriters are the expiring carrier. That's really getting at making sure we are only quoting new business. We are not really intending to use that for USLI renewals. I recommend for the description of operations being as descriptive as you can. This way, if there is anything funky, an underwriter can kind of intervene a lot more quickly. But we'll just put church with Sunday school. And the very popular address of 123 Main Street. And then as I scroll down, it's going to ask me for zip code. I will enter in this 95611. And we've got pretty much, it's going to fill in the city. And then it's going to ask about the property. So now we're talking about the building. In my example here, we're going to do a tenant-based church just to kind of show sometimes people get confused when you don't actually cover the building. We do still need to know what the building is constructed of. So let's just say this is a joisted masonry building. It's in protection class 3. We want special cause of loss because that's the broadest you can get. And we want this on replacement cost because we're going to just cover contents. The building was built in 1950. And then maybe I don't know about the plumbing and the roof, so I leave those as unknown. Totally fine. And I know the roof was recently replaced, we'll say about 5 years ago, and there's no sprinkler system. Again, all fine. Then it's going to ask you for building limit. Well, we don't have one, so then we'll go to business personal property, and we'll put in $50,000 contents coverage. And then it's going to pre-fill typically your 1 mil, 2 mil limits. You can adjust those if you want. And then the square footage of the space, it's not for the whole church, it's just really the space I'm occupying. Since my example, I'm just a tenant. And then pastoral professional is going to automatically be chosen. You can mark that as no, but I would recommend offer it, and you can always remove it at binding if you really don't want it. And then we're asking about other additional exposures like apartments or parsonage. I'm just going to mark no. And at this point, we should pretty much be done with our basic questions. I will have an option that if I want to actually go through all of the other questions, I can. So that's this continue to complete. That's just filling out the whole application. Really the best way to go, but if you're limited on time, this is a great way to get a bindable indication essentially. So here now we're just going to take a view of the quote, but the pop-up was blocked. And what we'll do instead, we'll just look through here, is you can see your property and your liability premiums are listed here. The example for me is that it's a total of $642, and you got your $229 for the property and $413 for the liability. We have this very low broker fee that CID offers right here, as opposed to sometimes what we see, and this kind of like breaks out your coverages. And if you wanted to at any point, if you wanted to review any of the endorsements, you can click on any of these links and it's going to show you your actual coverage terms. So you can email it from here. Oops, excuse me, up in this upper right hand corner, and pretty much that's really all you need to know. So we'll get back here. I think the biggest benefit I like to share from this is that you don't have the concern about having to actually fill out a cord form or an application. This is going to give you a pre-filled application after the quote. So again, how it works, if you call in versus going and quoting online, it's going to connect you to a bank of underwriters, and they're going to just ask you the key rating information, similar to what we just filled out. It usually takes about 5 minutes. And as I mentioned earlier, you can really do a good job of explaining it. And then just be mindful when you do get the quote, look at the prior to binding section. This is going to show you things you need to verify, and it's really going to be eligibility based. So it's very, very important. Under any of the underwriting notes, that's going to be more rate credit oriented. So just take a look at that. It's going to be after your pricing. And then once you get through that phone call, pretty much within 2 minutes, you're going to get a copy of that quote with the pre-filled application. CID is also going to receive the quote. And then once you're ready to bind, you just send that in to Michelle. So I'm going to turn it back over to Anae. I want to thank you for your time, and now we'll be available for questions. But Anae, thank you.
Great job, Kristen. Thanks so much. We really appreciate your wisdom, sharing your wisdom. So again, thank you guys for joining us. If you have any questions still, type them into the chat room and we will get those questions answered to you even if it's after the webinar ends. Make sure you visit our website, cidinsurance.com. There's lots of tools there for you. And Michelle you can contact her by phone, by email, and she'll answer any questions you have about churches, houses of worship. And again, we look forward to doing business with you, and those that are already a part of our family, thank you for your business. Have a great day, everyone.